Assalamu alaikum, good evening. I know that it's been a long night for everyone, and there have been some amazing speakers, and I'm particularly happy to see so many people here from Chicago. Who's from Chicago here? Kristen, this podium is almost dominated by people from Chicago tonight. But this organization really did me a great honor by inviting me to speak. I know AMP from Chicago, and I know the work they do, and I know some of the young people involved, and you should be very proud of them as their parents, as their family, and their communities, and I'm very proud to have been asked. And by the way, Kristen, I was a bit jealous of showing Kristen's face on that ADL list of the top 5 most anti-Israel speakers in the United States. As Kristen mentioned, I made that list too. But just so you don't think that we're being ignored, the ADL also, the Anti-Defamation League, one of the leading anti-Palestinian organizations in the United States, also issued an alert about this event tonight. And I'm very proud once again to have been honored by them for being with you. But this morning I woke up in Chicago very early and to catch my flight, and I wrote a short article for the Electronic Intifada as I was having my coffee, which says, the headline is, Jewish Federation of Los Angeles and Zionist Organization of America host anti-Muslim inciter Pamela Geller at pro-Israel event. And this was mentioned earlier. Pamela Geller, some of you may have heard of, she is a nasty piece of work. She is really a bad person. I don't like to talk like that about anyone, but this is someone who constantly compares Muslims to Nazis, who talks about using the Holy Quran as a doorstop. She and her organization helped spread a totally malicious lie that we debunked on the Electronic Intifada using all the official statistics and data. She was spreading a lie that Muslims were responsible for an epidemic of rapes in Norway in order to stir up hatred of Muslims. And this is serious because Anders Breivik, the man who murdered 77 people almost a year ago in the name of stopping the so-called Islamization of Europe, quoted her website dozens of times in his manifesto justifying his horrible crime. This is the woman that was being brought by the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles and the Zionist Organization of America to their offices. Now, if you've been here tonight and every word we're saying is recorded on camera, and you have heard a message from every single speaker tonight, and this morning I was at the training, I had the honor to speak to some of the young people at the training at UC Irvine. Every word you have heard has been about pursuing our rights, pursuing justice, honoring our history, honoring our communities, working with other communities in an interfaith way, in a way that respects ourselves and respects them, and stays true to the rights that we pursue. But can you imagine if we were to host somebody like Pamela Geller? I mean, when we come here to talk about peace and justice, we're called neo-Nazis. Even when we talk about peace and justice. So, we think about someone like that being hosted by the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles. Well, I published this article this morning, and by the time I got off the plane at John Wayne Airport. I can't get used to saying John Wayne Airport. By the time I got off the plane at John Wayne Airport, I'd learned that the event had been cancelled. And the credit for that goes to CARE and to AMP and to other groups who got together and issued a statement, an interfaith statement, which included groups such as Jewish Voices for Peace, along with AMP and with CARE to condemn this. And the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles was embarrassed enough to do the right thing. But while we should welcome their cancelling this event, we have to demand that these Zionist organizations do much more to fight the Islamophobia that is in their midst and which they have been fostering like a cancer since 9/11. We must demand of them that they distance themselves from the extremists in their midst. And it is not enough for the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles to quietly cancel such an event. They must repudiate the organizations and speakers who bring them in the first place. Their silence is not enough, and we have to demand much more from them. I also want to point out, because this is not just a great success in terms of our community speaking out and being heard, but this ties directly back to Palestine. Because what was the name of the event? Yeah. What was the name of the event that was supposed to be held this morning before it was cancelled? It was titled, Islamic Jew Hatred, the Root Cause of the Failure to Achieve Peace. That was the title of the event. And this is very important because this is to say, and this is the message that these groups are trying to send, is that this isn't about the Palestinian population being expelled from their homeland in 1948. This isn't about 63 years of our futures being stolen, the futures of our young people living in refugee camps or living under occupation being stolen. This isn't about the continued theft of Palestinian land. This isn't about the siege of Gaza and the slaughter of our people in Gaza. This isn't about the rights of our thousands of political prisoners held in Israel's dungeons. It isn't about any of that. It's these crazy Jew-hating Muslims. And if only we could solve the problem of these crazy Jew-hating Muslims, there would be peace. Now, this message is one that you take someone like Pamela Geller, and she puts it in a very crude way, in a very ugly and direct way, one that maybe embarrasses the major Zionist organizations. But the respectable groups send the same message in a much more subtle way. And you hear it all the time in the effort to market Israel as this haven of democracy amid this, sea of savages and barbarians and Muslims. This is the message that we're constantly getting from respectable experts in suits and ties from some of the major pro-Israel organizations. But it's the same message. And it's not a coincidence that the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles spearheaded a multi-million-dollar effort in this country launched in 2010 a $6 million investment called the Israel Action Network to fight what they call the delegitimization of Israel, what we call the struggle for Palestinian human rights and dignity. And to fight it on campuses, to fight it in churches where there is growing support for boycott, divestment and sanctions, and to fight it by what they call sabotage and attack of the Palestine Solidarity Rights Movement. They actually use those words. And one of those tactics is to demonize Muslims, to demonize our communities, and to paint us as extremists, as anti-Semites, as haters, and so on. So that's why it's so important that our communities join in this effort in a way that is built on a foundation of knowledge, of education, of mobilization, of a sense of responsibility for the community, and that people take part. And that's one of the things that I always take inspiration from the young people that I meet, and always say to parents. I remember my parents who thank God are in good health. I always remember that when I was in university, I'd get involved in Palestine activism. They would say, well, you know, they had this mix of feelings between wanting to support that because it was something they believed in, and say, but you know, we sent you to university to focus on your studies. And you know, stay out of trouble and stay out of... And many of us have heard that. But I think it's so important that we encourage our young people and our students to be the strong voices for the things that they believe in. And I think there's no better example of that than here in this community, the Irvine 11, who stood up and called Muhammad Aslam, Joseph, Muhammad, Ali, Osama, Asad, Khalid, Tahir, and Shaheen, who went through really a terrible ordeal that they should not have gone through because they stood up and spoke for the oppressed. And I think, and I don't want to speak for them, that perhaps they could not have gone through that ordeal without having the support of the community behind them. And we have to understand something very important, that assault on those young people, yes, it was first and foremost an assault on them, but it was an assault on all of us and our right to free speech and our ability to advocate for our rights in this country, and the attempt to criminalize speaking out for Palestine. And if we understand that, then we also understand something else, is it's not going to be the last such attack. And in fact, I could go through a long list, which I won't at this late hour, of similar attacks that are already taking place at campuses all around this country, especially here in California, where there are huge amounts of money being invested in... There's a professor at California State University, Northridge, David Klein, who has been one particular Zionist group calls itself the Global Frontier Justice Center. It's actually a front for an Israeli organization called Shurat Hadin, which is trying to get the state of California to criminally prosecute this professor for putting up a website that calls for the academic boycott of Israel. That's just one example. I could give you many others. But the strategy here is to use these as test cases. Even if they don't win that case, maybe the hope is to put that one professor through so much personal hell, through so much cost, through so much misery, that everyone else will say, well, I'd better just stay away from this issue. So if we're going to defeat those kinds of tactics, it's very important that we act as a community. And much more than that, that we act across communities. Somebody said earlier in the evening, I think it was Awad Hamdan who said that it's not enough to be working within the Muslim community. Muslims in the United States are not sufficiently numerous, not sufficiently politically powerful or influential to change the way things are going. We have to work in coalition. We have to work in interfaith communities, across political lines, and create a much broader front for justice in Palestine. I already talked about one example of that, the very powerful statement that came out about the Pamela Geller event. But another major victory that I think is the fruit of that kind of work came this week. How many of you in this room are educators at institutions of higher learning or high schools in California? I know that California is slightly different and has its own teachers and educators pension funds, and there may not be as many people who are enrolled in TIAA-CREF. But if you go to the rest of the country, TIAA-CREF is in fact the largest pension fund in the United States, and maybe even the world, I think. I think it's the largest in the world. Well, just in the past week, TIAA-CREF announced that it was divesting its social choice funds from Caterpillar. Many people have worked for this victory. Many people have worked for this victory, but it was particularly spearheaded by Jewish Voices for Peace, who did a lot of the running and the grassroots organizing. And did it in full consultation and coordination with the Palestinian boycott, divestment and sanctions movement. So that's a very important example. And in fact, it's even more significant because TIAA-CREF follows the index of socially responsible investments that's put together by Morgan Stanley. And Caterpillar was removed from that index as a result of the work of Palestine solidarity campaigns and communities. And we know that for a fact because the JTA, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, set out to disprove this. When JVP put out its press release announcing this victory, the JTA said, well, wait a minute, how do we know this has anything to do with Palestine? Maybe it has more to do with the labor strike that's going on, because in addition to helping Israel to demolish Palestinian homes, Caterpillar also treats its workers terribly and smashes unions. So maybe it has more to do with that. Well, JTA called up Caterpillar, and called up the people who put together the Morgan Stanley Index, and they confirmed that yes, indeed, the sales of equipment to Israel, of militarized equipment, was one of the factors that led to the removal of Caterpillar from the Social Choice Fund and the divestment of TIAA-CREF. And this news came just a few days after Norway's state pension fund, the largest pension fund in Europe, announced that it would no longer invest in the largest real estate and construction company in Israel because of that company's role in building settlements on Palestinian land. These are real victories. And I could, again, give you a long list of others. I have that list here, but I will spare it you at this late hour. The point isn't to list all the victories, although it's great fun to do that. The point I want to make is that none of these things could have been achieved by one group working by itself. That this is a global, transnational movement of which all of us in this room, if we're not already part of it, we need to be part of it. And it has Israel and its lobby frightened to death. Because they understand that our message, when we talk about, for example, the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement, this is a Palestinian-led movement, launched in Palestine in 2005. And it makes three basic demands that are just undeniable. An end to occupation of Palestinian and Arab land occupied in 1967. An end to all forms of discrimination, racism, and discriminatory laws against Palestinians in the 1948 areas. And the right of return. Is there any Palestinian, anywhere, Fatah, Hamas, religious, secular, young, old, you name it, you draw any line you want, who disagrees with those goals? Is there anyone in this room who disagrees with those goals? Those are the basic pillars of our struggle. And they reunify all the Palestinian people around one struggle. Palestinians in 48, Palestinians under occupation in the West Bank and Gaza, and Palestinians in the diaspora. Everyone from refugees in Lebanon and Jordan and Syria and Egypt to us, whether we're in Chicago or California, are reunified by these three simple goals. And the pro-Israel organizations have no answer to these demands because they're simple, they're legitimate, they're just. They're not just based in international law, they're based in the most fundamental and universal principles of human rights. So when, we get all these Zionist organizations and these birthright Israel programs, you want to tell me that some American Jewish college kid who has never set foot in Palestine has more right to live there than a Palestinian woman, 89 or 90 years old, living as a refugee in Gaza or Lebanon? Who can defend that in 2012? Who can defend the idea that 1.6 million Palestinians in Gaza should remain imprisoned, basically, just because they're not Jews? Because if you do a thought experiment, I do it sometimes when I speak. Now imagine that all the people in Gaza were Jews. Everything would change. The fences would be torn down. They would be invited to come back home. Their homes would be rebuilt. They would be given money and rehabilitation and so on. So this indicates, when you do this thought experiment and you do it with Americans, the fundamental racist apartheid nature of Israel and Zionism. So if we said instead of being Jewish or not Jewish, it was about skin color, who would defend it? Nobody. So we have to bring it back to these basic things. We are for human rights, for full equality for everybody. We're not against other people's rights. We are for equal rights for everybody. And I think it's often, and my time, I just want to say something in closing. And it's so easy for us to be discouraged by what we see, to feel overwhelmed by the enormity of the oppression, of the powerlessness we sometimes feel when we listen to the presidential candidates and their parties competing to see who can be the most fanatically pro-Israel, the most anti-Palestinian. Because it's not just about being pro-Israel. You have to be anti-Palestinian now to the point where you deny that Palestinians exist. One candidate says the Palestinians are an invented people. And the other one says, no, they never existed in the first place. They still don't exist. There's no such thing as Palestinians. They haven't been invented yet. This is the state that the political debate has reached. And so it's easy to be discouraged and overwhelmed by that. But I think we have a lot to feel very optimistic about. Our movement is growing. And it is attracting support from people all over the world. And it is alive, this cause, which is a cause of justice. It's not a tribal cause. It's that we don't support Palestine just because we're Palestinians. We support Palestine because it's a cause of humanity. And that's why it has the power to attract the support of people from all over the world. People who are like us and people who are unlike us. But they support it because they understand that it is a cause of justice. So it's growing. In Palestine itself, there is incredible steadfastness. Sometimes we feel depressed when we look at the lousy job the political leaders of the Palestinian national movement are doing. Lousy leaders, my goodness, for such a people, such a great people. What did they do to deserve such lousy leaders? Do you ever feel that? I do. And I say that without any kind of discrimination. That sometimes I feel that the leaders are not up to the people. But when you look at the leadership that is coming from the hunger strikers, I look at them and I say, these people are leaders. Because they could not be bought, they could not be dissuaded, they could not be discouraged. And we still have, after the hunger strike of Mahmoud al-Sarsak ended in victory a week ago, in victory after 90 days, Israel agreed to free this young man who should be playing football instead of sitting in a prison, to free him on July 10th when he refused to give up. But to remember, we still have several other prisoners who are on hunger strike, including Akram Rikhawi, who's now on day 75 and in seriously grave condition. That they reinvigorated people because they showed that it doesn't, you could say, I'm sitting here in California, what can I do? They showed that if you have nothing, if you are under the total control of the occupation, in prison, physically chained, literally chained, that you can still resist in an honorable and legitimate way. And they showed that. So I want to close by saying that I feel very optimistic in the next few years. You look at what's happening in Egypt, of course, that was alluded to earlier. But I don't feel that things will be so easy, in the sense that after Mubarak fell, many people thought that now Egypt will open the crossing to Gaza. And that didn't happen. Gaza is still under siege. So now some people say, well, now that Morsi won, they'll open the crossing. I frankly don't think they will. If I were to make a prediction, which is always very dangerous to do, I would say I don't think that even if they have the power to do it, I don't think that the newly elected government of Egypt will change the situation very much. I think they will be pragmatic, is the word. And I think there will be less change on the issue of Palestine than many of us hope to see. But it doesn't have to be that way. If the United States had had its way, if the Obama administration had had its way, President Omar Suleiman would now be celebrating his first anniversary in office. So it goes to show that even the most powerful country in the world cannot determine what happens. Only the people can. So impossible things can happen. And we've seen it in our lifetimes, some of us who are old enough to remember. We've seen the end of apartheid in South Africa, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the fall of Mubarak and the uprisings that have begun across the Arab world in the past year and a half, that nobody would have predicted. And I think that in the next 5 to 10 years, there is the potential to see an enormous transformation in Palestine, similar historic change. And for me, that time frame is very significant because for some of us, whether it's our parents or grandparents, who lived through 1948 and who left Palestine, the time is not infinite. And I really believe that our parents and grandparents deserve to see justice in their lifetimes, real justice. That Palestine is not just a theoretical cause that will be resolved sometime in the future, but it has to be real justice in their lifetimes. And I think that's really possible. It's realistic. It's pragmatic. That we can see the end of this oppression, the end of occupation, the end of racism, the end of apartheid, to see refugees actually going home, to see a new kind of regime where people, Muslims, Christians, Jews, can live in a spirit of equality, of harmony, of respect, that all of this is possible in our lifetimes. And it happened in the past. It is part of the history of Palestine that we can reclaim. But it's not going to happen by itself. It's on us to do it. Each and every one of us. Thank you.